Over 70% of Republican voters say they still support Donald Trump. Yet behind closed doors, party leaders are quietly preparing for a future without him. Here's the shocking part. Trump didn't lose ground because of a scandal, an election, or a courtroom. He lost ground because of one calm, controlled speech that sent a signal through Washington like an earthquake. No shouting, no insults, just cold political math. When Mitch McConnell stepped up to the microphone, most people thought they were watching another episode of Republican drama, a feud, a breakup, but that's not what this was. What happened next was something far more dangerous for Trump. Permission for allies to hesitate, permission for donors to pause, permission for the party to imagine life after Trump. And here's a question that should make you uncomfortable. What if this speech didn't attack Trump at all, but instead ended his protection? If that's true, then what you're about to hear next may explain the most important political shift happening right now. While most people aren't even looking, most people think political careers end with scandals, indictments, or election losses. But in Washington, careers often end much more quietly, through calculation. That's exactly what made this moment so dangerous for Donald Trump. When Mitch McConnell spoke, there was no anger in his voice, no personal attacks, no visible frustration. And that's the point. In politics, emotion signals weakness, while calm signals control. McConnell didn't lash out. He measured, timed, and delivered a message designed to last long after the cameras stopped rolling. For years, McConnell tolerated Trump's insults, public humiliation, and late-night attacks, not because of loyalty, but because the transaction still worked. Trump energized the base. McConnell delivered judges, power, and institutional control. But transactions only survive as long as both sides benefit. This speech was the moment McConnell quietly told the party that the cost of Trump now outweighs the benefit. And instead of saying it outright, he wrapped that message in the language of rules, precedent, and responsibility, language that carries enormous weight inside the Senate. This is why the speech landed like a shockwave. It wasn't designed to go viral. It was designed to be quoted, repeated, and used by others. Calm words gave Republicans something far more valuable than outrage, cover to hesitate, cover to distance themselves, cover to say, this isn't personal, it's procedural. That single shift transforms defiance into duty. And once politics becomes about process instead of loyalty, power starts moving fast. And usually, it never comes back. If this breakdown made you see politics differently, don't stay silent. Drop your take in the comments. We read them, we debate them, and they help shape what we cover next. These videos take serious research, time, and effort. So if you want more analysis that goes beyond headlines, hit subscribe. It's literally one click, but it makes a huge difference. And if you're still watching right now, you're exactly the kind of viewer this channel is built for. Stay with us, because what happens next is even bigger. What made this speech truly lethal wasn't what Mitch McConnell said, it was how he said it. He didn't accuse, he didn't moralize, he didn't even argue personality or chaos. Instead, he wrapped his message in the cold, formal language of institutions, rules, precedent, eligibility, constitutional responsibility. That choice wasn't accidental. In Washington, language defines outcomes. The moment a debate shifts from loyalty to legality, emotions stop mattering, and votes start moving. McConnell understood that better than anyone else in the room. By avoiding personal attacks on Donald Trump, McConnell removed the emotional shield that had protected Trump for years. Defending Trump as a person requires loyalty. Defending him as a legal question requires facts, and facts are much harder to bend. This reframing forced Republicans into a new position. They no longer had to choose between supporting Trump or betraying him. Now they could say something far safer. I support conservative principles, but I respect the rules. That sentence is political oxygen. It allows distance without rebellion, movement without confession. This is how real power operates, quietly, structurally, and with exits already built in. McConnell wasn't trying to convince voters watching cable news. He was constructing a roadmap for senators who were trapped between Trump's base and electoral reality. Once the issue becomes procedural, Conscience disappears behind process, responsibility replaces loyalty, and suddenly, not defending Trump doesn't look like weakness, it looks like discipline. That's the moment when gravity shifts, because when politics stops being about who you support and starts being about what the rules allow, the outcome is no longer emotional, it's inevitable. Here's what most viewers missed. Mitch McConnell was never speaking to Donald Trump. Trump wasn't the target, he was the context. The real audience was sitting silently behind McConnell, Republican senators, party leaders, and power brokers who've been frozen in place for years, terrified of making the wrong move. That's why the room felt so tense, not because people were shocked, but because they were calculating. In Washington, silence doesn't mean confusion. It means decisions are being made. For months, these senators have been trapped between two fears. On one side, Trump's base, primary challenges, donor boycotts, online attacks, political exile. On the other side, a deeper fear, permanent defeat. Losing swing states, losing suburban voters, losing relevance. As long as fear of Trump outweighed fear of losing elections, nothing changed. What McConnell did in his speech was signal that the balance has shifted. Without saying it directly, he told his caucus, the risk of sticking with Trump is now greater than the risk of stepping away. That's not rhetoric, that's a green light. And this is where the moment becomes dangerous. When a leader like McConnell speaks this clearly, it usually means the conversations have already happened behind closed doors. Quiet lunches, private calls, polling shown without spin, votes counted before words are spoken. Leaders at this level do not burn bridges unless they believe they're somewhere safe to land. That's why the speech didn't feel reactive. It felt final. It wasn't an explosion. It was the public confirmation of a shift already underway. And once powerful people realize we're no longer alone in their doubt, hesitation turns into movement. That's how political tides actually change, not with applause, but with permission. And this is where the shift became truly dangerous for Donald Trump. For years, Trump wasn't sort of treated as a normal political figure. He was treated as a movement. Movements are emotional, they're protected, they're defended even when they're messy. What Mitch McConnell did with his speech was quietly strip Trump of that protection by reframing him as something far less inspiring. A liability, not a hero, not a fighter, a risk factor. And in politics, risk is the fastest way to lose allies. Notice what McConnell didn't say. He didn't question Trump's popularity. He didn't insult his supporters. He didn't dismiss the movement itself. Instead, he focused on eligibility, rules, and institutional consequences. That subtle shift changes everything. Once a leader is framed as a risk to the system rather than a force within it, the conversation stops being emotional and starts being mathematical. Politicians stop asking, do I believe in him? And start asking, what does this cost me? And that's a much colder calculation. This reframing gives Republicans a new script. They no longer have to argue against Trump's message or confront his base directly. They can simply say, this isn't about ideology, it's about viability. That sentence is powerful because it doesn't sound like betrayal. It sounds like responsibility. It allows distance without confrontation and retreat without apology. Over time, that language spreads. Candidates repeat it. Donors echo it. Media normalizes it. And slowly, the idea takes hold that Trump isn't being rejected, he's being outgrown. This is how political eras actually end, not with a dramatic collapse, but with a gradual loss of confidence. When leaders are no longer seen as engines of momentum, but as sources of instability, support doesn't disappear overnight. It drains, endorsements soften, defenses weaken, silence expands. McConnell didn't need to tell the party to abandon Trump. He just needed to make it socially and politically acceptable to stop protecting him. And once that protection is gone, even the loudest movements can find themselves standing alone. What happened after the speech may have mattered even more than the speech itself. There was no immediate rush to defend Donald Trump, no coordinated outrage, no wall of unified statements, just silence. And in Washington, silence is never empty. Silence means people are watching, measuring, and waiting to see who moves first. When leaders stay quiet after a moment like this, it usually means they don't want to be on the wrong side of what comes next. If McConnell had overplayed his hand, you would have seen instant pushback, public statements reaffirming loyalty, urgent interviews, damage control, but that didn't happen. And that absence spoke volumes. It suggested that many Republicans were shocked by what Mitch McConnell said. They were prepared for it, maybe even relieved. Silence in this context wasn't confusion, it was acceptance and progress. This is how political shifts begin, not with applause, but with hesitation. When allies stop rushing to your defense, your power starts to erode. Silence gives permission for distance. It tells others you won't be punished for not speaking up. And once that fear disappears, the dynamic changes fast. What used to be mandatory loyalty becomes optional. What used to be risky becomes reasonable. In politics, the most dangerous moment for a leader isn't when critics attack, it's when supporters stop responding. Over time, silence creates space for alternative voices, space for new candidates, space for donors to pause and reassess. The longer the quiet lasts, the more normal distance becomes. And eventually, defending Trump starts to feel like the exception instead of the rule. That's when gravity shifts, not dramatically, not overnight, but enough that momentum changes direction. This is why McConnell's speech was so effective. He didn't demand action, he created conditions. And once those conditions existed, silence did the rest of the work. In politics, loud opposition can be fought. Silence cannot. At the core of this clash is something much bigger than two men. It's two completely different ways power works. Mitch McConnell represents institutional top-down control, donors, committees, rules, leadership structures. Donald Trump, on the other hand, built his influence bottom-up through emotion, loyalty, grievance, and a direct connection to the base. For years, those two models coexisted in an uneasy alliance. This speech was the moment that alliance collapsed. McConnell wasn't just criticizing Trump. He was testing whether institutional power still matters. His message was simple but dangerous. The system doesn't have to follow the base forever. By shifting the conversation toward rules and responsibility, he was asserting that structure, not spectacle, should decide the party's future. That's a bold move in an era where emotional loyalty often overwhelms procedure. And it's why this moment feels so volatile. McConnell is effectively betting that exhaustion will beat outrage, that voters will eventually choose predictability over chaos. But here's the risk. Trump's power doesn't rely on Senate rules or donor briefings. It relies on identity. His supporters don't experience politics as a legal process. They experience it as personal loyalty. That means this clash isn't easily resolved. If McConnell is right, the party slowly recenters, and Trump becomes a loud voice outside the structure. If he's wrong, the backlash hardens, primaries turn brutal, and the party fractures in ways that can easily repair. That's why the speech wasn't an ending. It was a bet that institutions can still impose order, a bet that the machine can outlast the movement, and once that bet is placed publicly, there's no going back. Here's what most viewers missed. Mitch McConnell was never speaking to Donald Trump. Trump wasn't the target. He was the context. The real audience was sitting silently behind McConnell, Republican senators, party leaders, and power brokers who've been frozen in place for years, terrified of making the wrong move. That's why the room felt so tense. Not because people were shocked, but because they were calculating. In Washington, silence doesn't mean confusion. It means decisions are being made. For months, these senators have been trapped between two fears. On one side, Trump's base, primary challenges, donor boycotts, online attacks, political exile. On the other side, a deeper fear, permanent defeat, losing swing states, losing suburban voters, losing relevance. As long as fear of Trump outweighed fear of losing elections, nothing changed. What McConnell did in this speech was signal that the balance has shifted. Without saying it directly, he told his caucus, the risk of sticking with Trump is now greater than the risk of stepping away. That's not rhetoric, that's a green light. And this is where the moment becomes dangerous. When a leader like McConnell speaks this clearly, it usually means the conversations have already happened behind closed doors. Quiet lunches, private calls, polling shown without spin, votes counted before words are spoken. Leaders at this level do not burn bridges unless they believe there's somewhere safe to land. That's why the speech didn't feel reactive. It felt final. It wasn't an explosion. It was the public confirmation of a shift already underway. And once powerful people realize they're no longer alone in their doubt, hesitation turns into movement. That's how political tides actually change, not with applause, but with permission. At the deepest level, this entire move comes down to one risky assumption, that people are tired, not bored, not disengaged, exhausted. Mitch McConnell is betting that after years of nonstop outrage, chaos investigations, and political whiplash, enough voters, especially independents and moderates, will choose stability over spectacle. That exhaustion, not loyalty, will shape the future. And that's a dangerous bet, because fatigue doesn't announce itself loudly, it shows up quietly. In turnout drops, softer enthusiasm, and hesitation at the ballot box. This is where Donald Trump still has a weapon McConnell can't control: emotional intensity. Trump's base isn't tired in the same way. They see politics as identity, grievance, and loyalty. McConnell knows this. That's why he didn't confront the base directly. Instead, he aimed at the middle. The voters who don't attend rallies, don't live online, and don't want politics to feel like a constant emergency. McConnell is wagering that this quieter group will ultimately outweigh raw enthusiasm. But here's the danger. If that fatigue turns into alienation instead of acceptance, the strategy collapses. A party can survive losing a leader. It cannot survive losing legitimacy with its own voters. Trump understands this instinctively. That's why his response hasn't been calm or conciliatory. It's been designed to force a binary choice: the man versus the machine. If enough voters take that personally, McConnell's institutional playbook stops working. That's why this moment isn't an ending. It's a crossroads, a gamble that exhaustion wins, a gamble that outrage burns out, and a gamble that history, not emotion, gets the final say. If McConnell is right, this speech will be remembered as a turning point. If he's wrong, it will be remembered as the spark. What makes this moment so unsettling is that nothing official has ended yet. No verdict, no final vote, no dramatic collapse. And that's exactly why it matters. What changed wasn't the Trump's position overnight. It was the environment around him. The protection weakened, the hesitation spread, and in politics, once doubt becomes acceptable, momentum rarely survives for long. This wasn't about winning an argument. It was about changing what people feel safe doing next. From here on out, every silence will mean something. Every delayed endorsement, every carefully worded statement, every candidate who suddenly talks about the future instead of the past. These shifts don't end trend on social media, but they decide outcomes. Power doesn't disappear all at once. It leaks, and once enough of it drains away, even the loudest voices start echoing instead of commanding. So the real story isn't whether Trump fights back. He will. The real story is whether the party follows him, hesitates, or quietly steps aside. That answer won't come in one moment. It will come in patterns. And those patterns started forming the second that speech ended. Now we want your take, not the loudest one, the honest one. Do you think this was the beginning of the end? Or a massive miscalculation? Drop it in the comments. We put a lot of work into breaking down power the way it actually works. So if you value that, subscribe. It's one click, but it keeps this channel going. And stay with us, because what happens after this moment may matter even more than the speech itself.